Hi everyone, Rethany Mixtano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Why You Know Review. It's our monthly segment where we talk about a series of records that I didn't get a chance to review over the past month or so, and that I just want to mention in brief here. Starting with the new Beyond Creation record, these guys are a Canadian technical death metal band with ties to infamous and amazing groups like Gorguts. They dropped their debut full-length LP in about 2011. It got reissued afterwards, which brought it this new wave of hype. And very quickly after that reissue, they have dropped this sophomore record. And one thing that sets this band apart from many other technical death metal bands is that they use fretless bass. So not as only kind of unique to hear the bass so prominent in a technical death metal record, but it sounds much different than most basses in this style of music too. Just the very kind of smooth, slinky feel of the bass on this record does give it some unique characteristics, which made their debut album worth celebrating. But on this new record of theirs, I can't really say they're doing anything all that different than what they already did on their debut. For people who really loved that record, maybe that's a good thing. But for me personally, not only is this album just a little redundant overall, but the way they write their songs and compose their songs as well just kind of feels a little one-dimensional. I don't really care for the performance and production style on this record. So rigid, robotic, clean, just overly flawless. Though if you are a technical death metal fan, I do recommend you check this record out. These guys definitely do stand out in a sea of bands in a genre that is increasingly becoming more and more saturated with groups that sound very much alike. Next, the new Parkay Quarts record. These guys are a Brooklyn indie rock, post-punk, bit of an art rock band too. Their album Light Up Gold, really liked that LP, but the follow-up, Sunbathing Animal, didn't really care for it. And this is their second release that they've put out this year. And I actually think they bounce back a little bit with this album. Even though there are a few forgettable original tracks, there are a few kind of uncreative and uninspired covers on here, including Nancy Sinatra's These Boots. There are a couple of fantastic songs on here, especially the very long closer where I think Andrew Savage really ups his poetry game. But Content Nausea, the title track of this record, just the way that song lyrically goes at the internet and information age that we're in the midst of right now, I think is really funny, clever, and exciting. So there are some great tracks on here. In some ways, I do think this album is better than their last, but maybe it was more intended to be for hardcore fans or something like that. I think the band gets a little just looser, sillier, more ridiculous, and maybe a little bit more political on this record. And even though I don't love every song here, it's rendered some interesting results. The new Neighbourhood mixtape, Black and White, hosted by DJ Drama and Don Cannon. These guys are a California pop rock band, and they are putting out a mixtape, which kind of just sounds like I'm listening to The Weeknd with a lot of rap features. It's okay, you know, it's not terrible, especially the cuts where you do get good MCs like Casey Veggies and Danny Brown. But a lot of the cuts that don't feature other MCs or some of the very atmospheric, whimpery hooks in between these rappers do feel kind of run-of-the-mill. The new Taylor Swift record, 1989. A lot of people have been asking me why I have not reviewed what is essentially 2014's first platinum album. Not a single pop album has gone platinum thus far this year, which I think is kind of an interesting thing when it comes to the current state of pop music. But anyway, this new Taylor Swift record, what do I think about it? In short, this album feels like 80s synth pop redone by 2000s era indie pop and indie-tronic artists, and then Taylor Swift building off of that. So it feels like a reinterpretation of a reinterpretation, in my opinion. There's nothing really all that interesting or special about this record in the greater scheme of things. It just kind of feels like they are taking some pre-established sounds and ideas and then just elevating them to a mainstream level with pop music darling that everybody seems to love. Taylor Swift is just really not that interesting to me. She does have some catchy hooks on this record, but there's just really nothing that compelling about this album. It just feels really borrowed, focus grouped, cleaned up, and just made safe so that it'll appeal to the widest crowd of people possible. And that's it. The ripples of hype we're seeing over this record are not because it's tide-changing, original, just mind-blowing music. It's because there's nothing at all adventurous or risk-taking about it. This album is about as palatable as vanilla ice cream, and about as exciting too. Next, the new Charli XCX record, Sucker. You might remember I didn't really care for her last full-length LP, and I did look into the writers and co-writers on this new album of hers, and I was surprised to see people like Ariel Pink and even Rivers Cuomo of Weezer credited as writing some of the songs on this LP. And bringing in people like them, and Greg Kurstin too, has given this new album of hers kind of a rock and pop punk flavor, whereas her last LP had so much more of a synth pop vibe. So while I do appreciate in a sense Charli trying to grab for a bit more edginess on this new record of hers, still, I just kind of feel like I'm listening to a more commercially watered down Sky Ferreira. And at times, lyrically and musically, this record shows a level of immaturity that even rivals that of Sleigh Bells. This record is the epitome of safe bubblegum pop, and that's about it. You know, you chew it, it's sweet, you spit it out when you lose the flavor. This album is essentially the soundtrack to too much makeup and underage drinking. Next, the new Blockhead album. Blockhead, infamous underground experimental and a very adventurous hip-hop producer, has produced fantastic music over the years for MCs like A$AP Rock. He has a new instrumental album out. If you're an underground hip-hop fan, try it out. I recommend it. Even though there are some redundant beats in the track listing here, there are a lot of interesting moments. Next, the new Budos band record. These guys are a funk band, a jazz funk band, and they have made nearly the same album again and again and again and again and again. Even though they have found many different compositions to work within this very limited style they compose music in, to me, it's just sort of lost its flavor a little bit. Their first few records, they have an EP as well that I love and that I own. But this newer stuff of theirs, it's not that they've gotten worse or anything like that, though I didn't really care for their third album. It's just sort of, lost its excitement for me. But if you are hardcore into that style and into that sound, do check this band out, because there are some great saxophones on this thing, some decent drum beats too, and for whatever reason, the record cover does kind of look like that of a stoner metal band. If you are new to these guys and you're new to funk and new to jazz funk in general, this is not a bad place to start. But as someone who has been listening to their music for a while, it's not that this album is terrible, but considering what I know and have said about their previous work, there's just not really anything to say about this new album. Other than that, it's a jazz funk album, and it's a Budos band album. They're just kind of doing what they've done since forever. And the new Savages collaborative album, which I haven't heard a lot of people in the comments make that much of a buzz about, but Savages are a very interesting punk and post-punk band from the UK right now, and they are collaborating with who I can only assume the name is pronounced Ningen. And together, they essentially create this one long 38-minute piece, which is just noise rock, experimental rock. It's just very long-winded. Even like for the first 8 minutes or 10 minutes or so, the song is just really building up tension. It's not like there's, any sort of clear composition coming through or anything like that. And then once you get toward the middle and the end of the track, even then, it's not like we get any clarity. It just becomes this monolith of noise and just chaos. So if you're looking for something that is just very, very abrasive and freewheeling, check this piece out. But maybe if you're looking for more of a song structure or something just a little catchier, maybe something with a bit of a groove, you might want to wait until Savages drop something a little more commercial on their next record. Next, the new Gazelle twin record, which for a while did intrigue me a little bit. There are some interesting vocal experiments on this record, and I find the stripped back and minimal electronics and glitches in the instrumentals here very odd and very hard to categorize too, though I do think at its core this album is very much like a record. Though in the vocals, I do hear some elements of The Knife, and Fever Ray. And the instrumentals are incredibly just strange and off-putting and very synthetic and glitchy, reminding me of Holly Herndon at some points. It's almost as if Holly collaborated with Karen Dreer Anderson of The Knife, and this record came out, except it's a different artist entirely. If, those two artists' names excite you because you're fans of their stuff, I would say check this album out. But this record, personally, for me, just wasn't sticking with me because of just how in the shadows it felt of its influences. And the new Mono albums, these guys are a Japanese post-rock band who have come out with a new couple of albums this year. And right now, I feel like we are at a point where just the third wave of post-rock has kind of just crested and fallen. And bands like Mono, who sort of came up in the midst of that, are in a position where listeners and sort of people who might have just sort of been following that trend need to be convinced that Mono has relevance and Mono has importance outside of that trend. They are in a position, in my opinion, where they need to be showing us their versatility and their ability to change with the times. And instead of doing that, they're just kind of handing us more of the same, with an interesting Envy collaboration on one of the tracks here, but still, again, no surprises. Same old dog, same old tricks. From what I was able to get from these couple of records, there was certainly nothing terrible, but again, just, nothing really exciting coming from the Mono camp. And the new Bent Knee album, Shiny Eyed Babies, a lot of you might remember that I had this album streaming on the channel a little while ago. These guys are an art rock band, progressive rock band, hailing from Massachusetts, I believe. And this record, instrumentally and vocally at points, isn't really bad, but as I sort of dove into the album, because initially I was just listening to a few tracks here and there, but as I dove into the album, I just kind of found the vocals just turning me off a little bit. And not really because they don't carry pitch or it's not a decent performance or anything like that, but there's just something about the inflection that really reminds me of like a musical theater. Just the vocals seem very, very over the top and maybe just a little overpowering on a lot of these instrumentals. And while I think this band is ambitious and it seems like they're in a very good way channeling some awesome influences, some progressive rock and maybe even Bjork at some points, I just feel like the balance of the vocals and the instrumentation just could have been done so much better. But still, I think this band has some interesting things to offer, and I will be looking forward to whatever their next project is. And, again, if you are into the artists that I mentioned, as well as progressive rock, art rock, that sort of thing, do check this record out. The new PRhyme, Primo, DJ Premier, and ROYCE da 5'9" coming together for a collaborative mini album. It's about 30 minutes or so. It has some very good features with Schoolboy Q, Ab-Soul, Killer Mike 2. And it's a decent collection of tracks, DJ Premier style beats, except you're getting those updated versions of those boom bap flavors he's been working with for so many years. And ROYCE da 5'9", he's a good MC, and I feel like the fact that he is so close to Eminem and Shady Records right now, it's very rare that we actually see him kind of step out on his own, proving the talent level he can work up to at this point in his career and at this age. And there's nothing awful about this record. I just think, I don't know, it could have been longer. I think some of the songs could have been better. For certainly the rapping was great, but, some of the themes, some of the hooks were just okay. And for such a short album, you can't really afford to be having any kind of just meh songs. But still, not a bad LP and not a bad record to finish off 2014's year of hip-hop. And finally, the new Theophilus London album, Vibes, which oddly enough was executive produced by Kanye West. Theophilus London, when he first dropped with tracks and EPs like Lover's Holiday, I thought he was pretty fantastic. He wasn't the greatest rapper on the planet, but he had some flow and he knew how to spit some catchy bars, and he wrote some really interesting hip-hop, synth-pop, new wave fusion instrumentals that I thought simultaneously felt modern but also kind of old school too. And on this new LP of his, it's like all of these characteristics of his that I liked are manifesting in the ugliest of ways. The instrumentals here just kind of feel like the worst of the worst, the bottom of the barrel when it comes to new wave revivalism. It's like he heard a Blood Orange record and decided to just drudge up the ugliest sounds and the most cliche ideas the 80s had to offer. And of course, Devontae Hines of Blood Orange is credited as taking part in this album at one point, so I'm not surprised. And on top of that, he is no longer rapping as much as he was on his previous stuff, and instead is singing. And Theophilus London is not that fantastic of a singer. The singing on his previous material made for some of the weakest points on his records, and now we have an album here where he is singing for nearly the entire LP. So the fact that he is not really that good of a singer, and we get even worse instrumentals and worse songs on this LP, to me, Theophilus London is just tumbling downward, and it's kind of unfortunate because for a moment there it seemed like he was going to be a sort of interesting figure in this new wave of kind of artsy, progressive, and left field rappers and songwriters that were kind of coming up post 2010. And that's it. Those are all the albums I'm going to touch down on right now. Cool? Cool. Transition, what did you think of these LPs? Did you love them? Did you hate them? Why? What do you think I should review next? And that's it. Anthony Fantano, music, Why You Know Review, forever.